Welcome to today's Safety Daily Advisor webcast brought to you by BLR and NPro. Today's program is entitled How to Get a Grip on Your Slip, Trip, and Fall Hazards. This is a 60-minute program. You may listen to the audio portion of the presentation through your phone line or your computer speakers, and you can sign on to the website and follow along as the speaker takes you through the materials. To view the materials, please go to beaconliveweb.com, enter the conference ID 6090, then enter your unique PIN provided in the instructions you received and click Join Meeting. You will remain in listen-only mode except when you are selected to ask a question. To join the question and answer session queue later in the program, simply press star 1 on your telephone keypad. I will announce you prior to bringing you into the conference. To ask a question via the webcast, go to the chat pod, which is located in the lower left corner of your computer screen. Type your question in the text box and then click on the Send Message button. You can submit your questions at any time during the webinar, and they will be addressed during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. If you'd like to download a copy of the presentation materials, you may do so from the Handouts tab in the Conference Materials pod on the left side of your screen. Our guest speaker today is Jonathan Neubauer. Mr. Jonathan Neubauer, CSP, is a Regional EHS Manager for NPro Industries, Inc. After completion of a BS in Environmental Management and Technology, Jonathan began his career performing environmental remediation and consulting services for public and private clients across New York State. Jonathan first began working in the safety field in 2005 when he began to offer fall protection and rescue training and consulting services to several wind energy development companies across the globe. Our sponsor today is NPro. NPro Industries is a diversified manufacturer of proprietary engineered products used in critical applications. We are a leader in sealing technologies, metal polymer, and filament wound bearings, components, and service for reciprocating compressors, diesel and dual fuel engines, and other solutions that meet the needs of industries worldwide. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Good morning, or good afternoon for some of you. Where I'm at, it's still morning, so thank you for joining us today. We're going to spend a little time talking about slips, trips, and falls, which for any of you like myself coming out of the Northeast has been a pretty big hazard as of late, although I guess it is spreading across the entire country. It's not isolated just to the Northeast. But we're going to spend some time talking about the winter weather hazards as well as some of the other challenges that we face throughout our workplace. Just to start off, the first item I would like to show here is an internal program that we use within NPro Industries as well as NPro Learning Systems, which is our health and safety leadership and consulting division with NPro Industries. And it comes right out of our Safety First program. And basically our trigger when it relates to slips, trips, and fall hazards within the workplace is if you don't grip, you could slip. We all know that one of the most difficult things to change within our workplace is the habits of all of our employees, the things that they do unconsciously without even thinking about it. And oftentimes that plays a very direct role in many instances, but also in slips, trips, and falls. So because this is one of our 4 leading risks within our workplace, we developed a trigger specific to this. And if you don't grip, you could slip, and that could relate to your footwear. It could also relate to things like tooling and things of that nature. But I'll spend some additional time talking about the Safety First program and NPro Learning System a little bit later in the presentation. From there, I would like to just kind of lay out what the agenda is for this discussion. And we're going to begin by talking about the definitions of slips, trips, and falls. I know that they seem somewhat self-explanatory, but we will go through those definitions. And then we're going to spend some time talking about how we identify slips, trips, and fall hazards within our workplaces and how to control those slips, trips, and falls. And then lastly, we'll talk about leading a safety culture to overcome complacency and really take action to make sure that we mitigate these hazards before an incident can occur. When we talk about slips, trips, and falls in the workplace, I think it's pretty easy to take a look at them and really not focus a whole lot on these types of injuries. These hazards throughout our workplace, but I don't think that we oftentimes give them the attention that they require. So I put together some statistics here out of the Department of Labor, and really slips, trips, and falls make up the majority of general industry accidents as well as in the construction industry. 15% of all accidental deaths are caused by slips, trips, or falls, and is the second leading cause behind motor vehicle accidents. Obviously, that's the leading cause of deaths within the workplace, but right behind it is slips, trips, and falls. About 12,000 of these incidents occur per year, and that's what's reported. So on top of that would be all the near misses, all the first aids, all the opportunities that aren't actually getting reported to the Department of Labor. These do make up almost 25% of all reported workers' compensation claims per year, and they also account for about 17% of all the disabling occupational injuries. Mostly driven through falls. Fall from heights obviously can have a very severe consequences, very severe injuries resulting out of them. But in my experience, the slips and the trips are also equally hazardous. We've had some pretty significant incidents occur with the clients I've worked with over the years, and something as relatively minor as slipping on ice in a parking lot can result in long-term disabling injuries, which is why we need to spend time and focus on getting these issues identified and corrected before an incident takes place. The next slide just kind of lays out, for those of you that are following along, I'm on slide 5 now, this lays out the main causes of slips, trips, and falls. Flooring makes up about 50% of these incidents, and that could be, wet floors or uneven floors, that sort of thing. Training accounts for up to 7%, or failure to train. Failure to warn employees, or I guess it could be customers or anybody, about a hazard that they're presented with, make up about 9% of those slips, trips, and falls. And then improper footwear make up about another quarter. And according to these statistics out of the Department of Labor, there's also a pretty high number of fraudulent claims that are reported, upwards of 10% of all slips, trips, and falls. We're not going to focus on that today. We're really focusing on the issues like flooring, training, warning, and things like footwear. So just to start off with the definitions, what is the definition of a slip? And if we go into a dictionary, we'll find that it's when we have too little friction or traction between the feet and the walking or working surface, resulting in a loss of balance. So again, I think we're all very aware of what a slip is, but that is when we do not have the proper contact between our feet and the working surface that we're on, and causes us to slip. We don't always fall, but you can still have an injury resulting out of slips even without contact to a lower level or the ground. Muscle strains, back pulls, all these things can come about, knee injuries, things like that can come out just from slipping without actually falling and hitting the ground at all. Next, talk a little bit about trips. So trips. You can see in the photo right there on the right of slide 7, some hoses in the way. There's also some other objects there on the floor, spraying water on the floor. But the definition of a trip is when our foot or lower leg hits an object, the upper body continues moving, and that results in a loss of balance. It can also be caused when you're stepping down to a lower surface, losing balance, or stepping up. One of the things that we're going to talk about is when you have steps in a staircase that don't have the even rise over the stairway. If one step caused you to lift your foot a little bit higher than another, it's very easy to catch your toe on that step and trip. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. When we discuss falls, this is when our center of balance is too far off, and there could be two distinct types of falls that we're going to talk about. A fall at the same level, and this is when we're walking or working, and maybe we slip and we fall just to that level or against an object. And then there's the falls to a lower level, whether we're working up on a ladder or some other platform. Falls to a lower level can really result in some catastrophic injuries. You can see on the photo there on the right on slide 8, this is a little demonstration that one of our employee safety teams put together at our facility in Palmyra, New York. We use mannequins to help communicate some of the hazards that we have in our workplace, and these mannequins just get moved around the plant, and they set up different scenarios just in a way to communicate things to our employees. And in this particular instance, you can see that they have an employee up working on a little step ladder there. He's losing his balance and falling backwards, and a coworker's there to catch him. Just a way to raise awareness for our folks when they're working up on a ladder at a higher level, just to pay additional attention, be looking out for one another while we're doing any work at heights. So now on to slide 9, we'll move into some of the causes of slips, trips, and falls. I think one of the most common causes of slips is when we have a wet product or spill on a smooth floor or walking surface. This can be water or mud or grease or oil from equipment. Coming from a manufacturing industry, it's easy to have pieces of equipment that are maybe leaking coolant or oil, and if we don't have good catch pans underneath or we don't have good housekeeping programs in place, that can create a very significant slip hazard. It could also come from other things such as blood or bodily fluids after an injury while you're responding, food, or other materials on the floor. One of our large hazards in our workplace can also be dry product on the floor. We work with PTFE powders, which is very slippery. Sawdust from woodworking activities, graphite, all sorts of these materials, when they accumulate on the floor, can make it really easy to lose your traction with the floor and sustain a slip. So these are the types of things that when we have our employees out doing housekeeping audits and inspections, or we're walking through our workplace, we're really keeping our eyes focused on these types of hazards so we can identify them quickly and get them mitigated. And again, because they can come about so commonly, that's why we've developed that trigger for our behavior-based safety training program. If you don't grip, you could slip. It's just something that sticks out very readily in your mind as you're walking through an area, or if you actually are involved in a near miss. It's really easy to make sure that we identify these hazards and get them corrected before somebody else sustains a similar type of incident. On to slide 10. Some other causes of slips. Highly polished floors can be very slick even when they're dry. Concrete, marble, ceramic tile, also when that's wet, can become very, very slick. Freshly waxed surfaces, if you have a janitorial crew at your facilities and they go through and they've just freshly polished or waxed the floors, you know how slippery that can be. Also transitioning from one surface to another. We find this oftentimes going from an office environment into a manufacturing environment or a clean room environment where you're leaving a carpeted floor and making your way onto a vinyl or smooth concrete floor. Really easy to kind of get complacent with the surface you've been walking on, and when you make that transition, very easy to sustain a slip. One of the instances that really comes to my mind on this in particular, the smooth and slippery floors, is we built a new factory at one of our locations back in 2009. And we went through and we had some really nice polished concrete floors put in. Facility looked beautiful, absolutely phenomenal. But when we started getting in there and working, again, we work with PTFE, we soon found that we had a very significant slip hazard. We took some measurements of, the grit on the floor and the ability to slip on that floor, and we realized that we had a really significant issue for our employees. So we actually had to go through and grind down the entire floor and bring some texture to it to eliminate that slip hazard. But that sticks out in my mind very clearly. We had great intentions to come in and have a very clean environment, really nice smooth floors, and we didn't realize the potential that was going to create for slip hazards in our work environment. So one of the things that's now one of the things that we've incorporated very thoroughly into our environmental health and safety review process for any new processes, buildings, renovations, that sort of thing, making sure that we've taken a really good, strong look at the walking and working surfaces and make sure that we mitigate any of those issues or eliminate them before we actually go forward with the work. So on to some of the leading causes of slips and trips within our businesses. You can see two photos here. One is probably somewhat familiar to some of the folks on the call. You can see all the snow and the ice built up there between these two doorways. So snow and ice coming in from the parking lots, moving in between buildings, very significant hazard in the late fall, winter, and early spring months. Some of the things that we've put in place to help mitigate those hazards would be having salt barrels by every single doorway. Anybody can go through and lay down salt if there's a slippery surface accumulating. There's also shovels with responsible people assigned to every door at the plant. That way, if we start getting snowfall, we go out there and we're able to stay on top of it very, very quickly and eliminate the possibility for anybody slipping and falling. But one of the hazards that is created by all of this salting, as you can see that in the photo on the right, is people come into a building, they kick their feet off on these rugs, creating a bunched up hazard right here where somebody could trip over it. And it may not be very easy to see, but there's also a lot of salt, both on the carpet and around the carpet. And those little salt granules now also add in their own slip, trip, and fall hazard. You hit that smooth floor when you step off of the carpet, and your foot is on top of all that salt. It's really easy to lose your balance there as well. So we really had to step up our housekeeping efforts, not only outside but also inside during this time of year. Even when it's not a period of heavy rain or snowfall, I found that these carpets continue to create hazards in the workplace. A door can be opened up and bunch the carpet up, or somebody shuffling their feet, or maybe they just move around on their own. So we're actually moving away from some of these types of carpets to more of the rubber mats and things of that nature to eliminate this hazard altogether. But these are two of the most common causes of slips and trips within our businesses across the globe. On slide 12, we'll start talking a little bit about causes of trips. And again, I think the best way to identify these and get them mitigated is just to develop a culture where our employees are constantly looking out for hazards, always looking out for one another, and they take part in daily 5S or housekeeping audits and inspections where we can identify these things very quickly, get them identified and resolved before somebody has an incident. But the things that we want people looking for: uncovered hoses, cables, wire or extension cord, air hoses. Again, relating this back to the manufacturing industry, air hoses are one of those things that I commonly see kind of stretched out across the floor from where they're actually connected to the air line over to a machine where we're using them. So we've really invested some time and effort into putting drop downs throughout our buildings so that way we don't have cords and hoses being stretched across the floors. But this is a very, very common cause of trips in the workplace. Clutter. This can be in aisleways on the shop floor, in walkways, but also in office areas. Boxes of paper maybe for a copier that's just laying on the floor, or paper itself, just a piece of paper on the floor, something you can slip on and fall. But the office environment is definitely not immune to these types of hazards, and especially under desks with phone lines and internet lines and all sorts of different cables and things running underneath. It's easy to get your feet twisted up, and then when you go to stand up and walk away, sustain a trip. Open file cabinets, desk drawers, things of that nature are also very common hazards, not only in the office but also on the shop floor, and one of the things that we really need to keep an eye out for. On slide 13, we'll continue on with the cause of the trips. Changes in elevation. This has been another concerted effort to eliminate any platforms in our business or the need for even small step stools or ladders. We just have had way too many near misses and safety opportunities result out of using these in our operations. Even something as simple as a 6-inch platform to get you up a little bit higher in front of a machine, that stepping up or the ability to step inadvertently backwards off of that creates a very significant trip hazard. Not to mention that oftentimes you not only see a platform for people to work on, but you also see some ergonomic matting, and that this creates another opportunity for a trip and fall hazard when you have a loose mat on top of a platform and people constantly going up and down and making their way along those platforms. But making sure that if you do utilize those in your business, have a very clearly defined edge, whether that be highlighted in a certain color or however you want to go about identifying that, maybe a safety chain or something like that that lets people see that there's a change in elevation coming up, especially true on ramps as well. Sometimes ramps are really easy to not notice because they kind of blend in to the floor, into the background, so making sure that they are very readily identifiable so people can prepare themselves for that change in elevation. We already discussed the rumpled or rolled up carpets or mats, but if anybody has similar challenges to what we have, it's not only these mats and carpets by doorways. Again, going back to that anti-fatigue matting, that ergonomic matting, one of the things I've found in my experience is that matting can deteriorate fairly quickly, creating a trip hazard when little holes are worn out in it or they become torn or tattered. But also, one of the things I've noticed is that when that anti-fatigue matting has run its useful life, instead of taking that matting off the floor and disposing of it and getting a new mat, people tend to layer mats, one on top of the other. And now we have 2 or 3 different layers of matting on the floor, very easy to create a trip hazard. So if you have those types of issues in your workplace, just staying on top of that through our inspections process or our auditing process. There's also some really great ways to eliminate those mats altogether. When we think about the hierarchy of controls and the process by which we want to go about managing these types of hazards, our best option is to always eliminate it. And in a case such as the anti-fatigue matting, there's great insoles and things like that you can purchase that go directly into your shoes, help get you that level of comfort and anti-fatigue rating that you need, but they do not create the slip, trip, or fall hazard. Again, irregularities in walking surfaces, tripping over thresholds or gaps in the floor or a walkway or a platform. Then obviously any flooring or work surface that is damaged, missing tiles or bricks or uneven flooring. Also looking outside, concrete and asphalt in the walkways and the parking lots. You get potholes or cracks in the pavement. Very easy to catch your toe on those when you're walking into the facility and sustain a trip, especially during the winter months when sometimes the snow and other materials can really kind of mask that uneven walkway. It's really easy to not see that there's a pothole in front of you because it's covered up by 2 or 3 inches of snow. So one of the things that we do every year is after the winter has subsided, we have to go through and do an assessment of all of our walkways and parking lots and make sure that we have a repair and maintenance program in place to correct those as soon as we're able to, so that way we eliminate those hazards prior to the following year. We usually do that again in the fall and winter time. I'm going to talk about this a little bit later when we discuss the weather issues, but one of the things we also do is we actually will go outside and map all of the areas in our walkways or roadways that accumulate water in mud puddles. And it sounds kind of silly to create a map of all the mud puddles at your facility, but when you're in a climate like we are in the Northeast, you need to know where those areas are so you can put focused attention on them in the winter months and not be surprised if you have black ice and things forming, especially late fall and early spring where you have that melt during the day and the freeze at night. If you don't know where those low-lying areas are, those hazardous areas are, it's really easy to get complacent and forget about them until somebody sustains an injury. So if you go about that process of doing your inspections of your walkways and your parking areas, you can identify a couple different hazards and get them taken care of right before the season begins. Again, on to slide 14, we discussed this a little bit, but non-uniform or improper or irregular steps or damaged steps. We're going to talk a little bit about the regulations pertaining to handrails and things like that, but this is definitely a challenge of some of the older facilities that may be out there, facilities that had stairwells or staircases built before building codes came about, and you don't have the normal rise and run that you would see in newer buildings. The stairways might be at a steeper angle, or the rise might be a little bit more, a little bit less than what people are typically accustomed to, and really can create a trip hazard. But again, making sure that we clearly define the edge of the step, the nose of the step, we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Making sure that they're uniform all the way from top to bottom, and having a plan in place to take anything out that is not up to code or not up to spec, and getting that reconstructed in the manner to which it should be is really important. And then, of course, if there's any damage in a stairwell to a handrail or to the stairs, those things should be addressed immediately, as well as doors that could, open directly into a stairwell. It's another thing you gotta pay close attention to. You don't want to be walking up a flight of stairs with something in your hand to begin with, but if you were, now you have to open a door towards yourself and step back down a step in order to create that space. You're just creating another hazard on top of the initial behavioral issue, which is carrying arm loads of stuff up the stairs to begin with where you can't hold on to a good handrail. On to slide 15, some of the environmental conditions that can increase the risks of trips or slips. And it doesn't really matter where these hazards exist. If they're there, they can contribute to or directly cause an incident themselves. Poor lighting. Within the workplace and, again, outdoors and parking areas and walkways, if you don't have enough light to see where you're going, where you're placing your feet before you step, it's very easy to sustain a slip, trip, or fall. Having a lot of glare off of headlights or equipment or, maybe there's spotlights in your business. If you're unable to see clearly where you're about to place your foot, you're just increasing your risk for a slip or a trip. Same thing goes for shadows. Sometimes we are required to wear PPE to help protect us from a hazard in the workplace, but we also have to look at any footwear that we utilize and make sure that it's not going to create a slip or trip hazard in and of itself. If anybody has the temporary steel-toed shoe covers that you loan out for visitors or customers, some of the older styles of those where they're actually just a metal piece that kind of rubber band around the shoe, those can create a slip hazard or a trip hazard in and of themselves. But so could big waterproof boots and things like that. Thinking back to my days in environmental remediation, going in and cleaning tanks, and you have big, thick, heavy-duty boots on, really easy to misstep or to kind of roll your foot off to the side and trip or fall because of the PPE itself. Obviously, any area where you have fog or mist or perhaps water and things like that on the floor where you can't directly see where you're placing your foot would increase our hazards. Poor housekeeping, I think that's an easy one to identify and also a really easy one to correct. If the culture in the workplace is one in which, again, people are constantly keeping their eyes out for these types of hazards and picking up the work areas, this one should be one that you can manage really easily and get it off of the list of hazards. But again, when we're going back to talking about the materials we work with, the materials we process, we need to make sure that we stay on top of our housekeeping. We're sweeping floors, we're washing floors, we're picking up after ourselves to make sure that we don't have these hazards out in the workplace. I think that out of all these ones on the list, that's one that's really easy to get every employee involved with and get them to help identify and correct these issues. If we're not cleaning the floors properly, to the second to last point here, that could help contribute to a slip or a trip. If we're not washing the floors thoroughly enough, or maybe we're actually putting something on the floor or walkway that creates a slip hazard itself, I know when we're in the process of washing the floors, that's going to create a slick area where somebody could slip, but having the proper signage out or closing off the walkways or the hallways while that work is going on can help manage those issues. And that speaks to the last point a little bit, missing signage, but that also can pertain to areas outside of housekeeping activities. Again, making sure we identify a leading edge or the nose on a stair or at the edge of a platform, something along those lines, making sure that we have as much communication out there as possible to keep people constantly focused on the task at hand and what they're doing is very, very important. On slide 16, talk a little bit about the things that each and every one of us face to a certain degree that could increase our risks of a slip, trip, or fall, not only in the workplace, but anywhere we are in life. As we get older, our eyesight starts to fail, our perception may begin to fail. Age in and of itself and our ability to have balance and traction as we're moving throughout the environment, those things begin to diminish. We're just not as steady on our feet as we once were and can lead to an injury or an incident. Physical condition or fatigue. If you're tired, if you've been worn out, if you're really out of shape and just not somebody that's able to walk long distances, that can definitely play a role in a slip or trip incident. As you become tired, you might not lift your feet as high. You may not be paying as much attention to where you're placing your feet, and they can definitely contribute to a slip or trip. Same thing with stress or illness. Anything that takes your mind off of what you're doing at that particular moment in time can definitely lead and contribute to a slip or a trip. And I think the last bullet on slide 16 here is fairly obvious, but anytime we have anything in our body that can impact our ability to see clearly or think clearly or our coordination definitely can have an impact on a slip or a trip and fall in the workplace. And I think that those types of issues can be managed through other programs, drug testing, things of that nature. Having a program where employees who might be on medication, allowing them a safe and confidential way to bring that forward so we don't inadvertently put them in a situation to harm themselves, I think are extremely important. On slide 17, a couple more. This is where we start talking about the habitual side of what we do and how we can increase our risks for a slip or trip in the workplace. Again, carrying something that's too cumbersome or simply too many objects at a time, whether that's on a flat, level floor or if you're going up and down stairs. If your arms are full of boxes or papers or whatever it happens to be and you're walking up a stairwell and you can't have your hand on the handrail and you also can't see where you're placing your feet, you've really just exponentially increased the risk of a trip or a fall. We want to make sure that no matter what, any time we're on a stairwell, we're able to have one hand on that handrail. That way, if we begin to lose our balance, you can grab on there and prevent that injury from ever taking place. But if your hands are full and you're unable to see where you're moving to, really putting yourself at risk. Not paying attention, we discussed that one already. Taking unapproved shortcuts. This is kind of a pet peeve of mine, if you will. But at one of our facilities, at all of our facilities, we're tobacco-free companies. So anytime you want to, smoke a cigarette or anything, you have to venture off property. And we have walkways and driveways that we maintain. But when folks go out to take a smoke break, I see this little trail through the snow coming down a slope from where our building sits down to the roadway. And instead of taking a couple of minutes, not even a couple of minutes, a couple extra seconds, to walk 20 or 30 feet down the sidewalk where it's been nicely cleaned from snow and there's salt and it's safe, people just take that immediate shortcut right down the hill and put themselves at risk when they don't need to be. It's already risky enough moving around outside this time of year in climates that have the snow and the ice, but to then compound that by going off of the trail and making your own through the snow on wet, slick grass just really that's one that irritates me quite a bit, actually. It doesn't have to be just that. It could also be an unapproved shortcut within the workplace. Instead of walking around, say, a conveyor belt moving along the floor or going to the proper walkway and instead stepping over a hazardous area or stepping over a drain or something that's uncovered, we're just putting ourselves at risk. Maybe it's as simple as not putting up a temporary railing when we have an unguarded floor opening that we'll talk about in a little bit. These shortcuts are ways that we just add more risk to what we do in the businesses. And again, this comes back to the habits of people, what we do without even thinking about it. I'm sure those folks that are walking down that snowy hillside at the facility are not thinking about the risk of slipping or tripping or falling. They're thinking about going out and getting their cigarette break and getting back into work within the allotted time, and that's the decision that they've chosen to take. So we really focus on impacting and changing the habits of our folks through our Safety First program. And again, that's where that trigger was derived from. If you don't grip, you could slip. It's an easy, simple thing that pops into your head. Anytime you see a risk or find yourself faced with a situation that you're not quite sure is right, that trigger will jump out in your mind, and you're able to stop what you're doing and go about it the right way. And then lastly, I think this hurrying or rushing plays a role in many of the incidents that we all deal with within our workplace. But any time we're out running or rushing through a work area, definitely putting ourselves at an increased risk of a slip or a trip, just because of the fact that we're in a state of mind where we're hurrying or moving along too quickly, and obviously as we're moving that quickly, we may not be taking the time to think about where we're placing our feet or holding on to a handrail, those sorts of things. So on to slide 18, some methods for controlling slips, trips, and falls. Moving into slide 19, and I think the best place to begin is the design of workplace and work processes. And I touched on this a little bit earlier with the floor within the new facility, but if we're able to have a review process right when we're in the design phase and tackle these issues before they're actually presented to anybody, I think that's our best bet. Again, looking at it from the hierarchy of controls perspective, elimination of the hazard is always our best option. If we can't eliminate, we substitute in a safer practice, and if we can't substitute that in, then we start going through some of our other methodology for controlling, whether that be through engineering controls or PPE or administrative controls. But that first bullet there will help us eliminate these issues before anybody is actually exposed to them. And again, if we approach the design of our workplace and work processes from the perspective of making sure that we don't have to have people walking up and down stairs all day long or stepping up and down off of platforms or ramps or whatever it may be, if we can eliminate all those hazards right there to begin with, we're in pretty good shape. We've already spoken pretty extensively about good housekeeping, but again, definitely an area where we can have a very large impact on the hazards in our workplace, not only from a slip, trip, and fall perspective, but definitely the housekeeping has a direct correlation to preventing slips, trips, and falls. The more we stay on top of that, the more we do our inspections and audits, and we go about correcting these issues, the better off we're going to be. Safe walking practices. I'll touch base on this a little bit later in the slide. You'll see one of the things that we've done at our facility in New York to help combat the winter weather. But following the proper walking routes and practices, if you have designated aisles within your workplace, they're much easier to make sure that those are maintained and free and clear of any recognized hazard. Same thing with outdoors. The more we can go about designating walkways, the easier it is for us to focus on those areas in particular and make sure they're safe for people to get in and out, not just in their day-to-day commute to and from work and their job, but also if there's an emergency that pops up, we know that the egress will run smoothly because there's nothing blocking their way in or out. And then lastly, wearing proper footwear. This sounds like a pretty easy thing to implement, but it's not. Everybody comes to work with different footwear. The slick bottom shoes that you'll see many men wearing with the shoes that they have may have really slick bottom. High-heeled shoes can obviously contribute to a slip, trip, or fall, especially in adverse weather conditions. Maybe, sneakers aren't the best thing for us to be wearing in the work environment, but we need a good, thick, rubber-soled shoe that is resistant to slips on oil and grease and that sort of thing. Making sure that you've really properly assessed the hazards, not only to the foot from an impact perspective where something could be dropped or something roll over your feet, but also looking at the footwear from the perspective of, are these shoes going to enable our employees to have the level of traction that they need both indoors and out is extremely important. Another example on this that comes to mind, if any of you have the membrane-type roofing on top of your buildings, that can get really, really slick in wet or winter-type conditions. So making sure that you have really good footwear for doing those types of activities is essential. You can't necessarily have some of the other PPE out there because of punctures and things like that could be caused by the shoes on the roof. But you can definitely go about setting up matting and handrails and all those sorts of things to be able to navigate that area safely. One last item on the footwear, there's several different companies out there that make them, but there are devices that you can slip right over your shoe to give you better traction, especially on snow and ice. We utilize them quite extensively with our maintenance department. I've also got them for my own personal use, but just offering up those devices for people who we know are going to be in a hazardous slip or trip environment, to slide them on over your shoes, usually they're just some sort of silicone or rubber material with looks kind of like springs wrapped around to help give you some bite into that snow or ice. Really beneficial and helpful. On to slide 20, just a little bit more in depth on the workplace and work process design. Again, going back to equipment, when we set it up, when we do our inspections and audits, have we set everything up to prevent a discharge or splatter or spillage of any of our cutting fluids or processing fluids, dust or stringers or anything coming off of lathes or CNC machines, oil leaks, are there drip pans underneath? All of that stuff is essential to look at from the workplace and work process design perspective. The exhaust ventilation can come into play when we're dealing with dust, having good dust collection, getting it out of the work area before it accumulates on the floor and creates that slip or trip hazard. Having enclosures around areas to keep them free and clear, and then again making sure that we have catch or drip pans or drain-off systems in place to remove water or liquids away from the walking and working surface to eliminate those hazards. Slide 21 continues on a little bit more with the workplace and work process design. Again, going back to marking or highlighting the step edges or transition areas using anti-skid paint, slip-resistant coatings. Sometimes there's just like sticker strips that you can put down that have reflective or an eye-catching color on them. Making sure that your stairwells and walkways have sufficient lighting, handrails, stair rails where necessary. And we'll talk a little bit about those requirements here in a moment. Providing effective drainage or fault floors, and then again installing slip-resistant flooring in high-risk areas. These are all things that can be done from a design perspective to eliminate the possibility of a slip or a trip. So on to slide 22. We're just going to talk a little bit about some of the regulatory compliance issues that I've had questions brought up to me recently on. The first being floor openings. Every stairway floor opening has to be guarded by a standard railing, and this goes to some additional types of floor openings that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But railings have to be provided on all exposed sides, except obviously an entrance to a stairway or something like that. But we need to make sure that anytime we have a stairwell with more than 4 steps, we've got stair rails and handrails on the railings to eliminate the possibility of stepping off those unguarded floors. And you'll see in slide 23 a pretty good example of an unguarded floor opening there. And that opening is large enough to fall through. You can see that there's a handrail system along the walkway on the right side of the picture, but there's a section there that is completely unguarded. It'd be really easy for you to be involved in a conversation, not paying attention to where you're placing your foot, and put your foot down there and sustain a fall. So we need to make sure that every floor hole into which persons can accidentally walk shall be guarded by either a standard railing with a toe board to make sure we don't kick something off on the people below us, on all exposed sides, or we need to have a cover in place that is built to be strong enough and constructed well enough to prevent somebody from falling through. You can also think about these from the perspective of things like skylights, having those guards over skylights. The light itself is not necessarily strong enough or constructed in a way to prevent you from falling through, so oftentimes they have additional guarding over top. Even though it's not a standard floor opening, it's the same type of thing, making sure that we have a cover over place that if somebody stepped on it, they would not be able to go through and fall to a level below. And from my work experience, where I saw most of this was in the wind turbine industry. As you're climbing the ladder up the turbine, there's several different platforms along the way up. And if you had to get off onto a platform to do some work, there's not only a gate there, but there's also a floor cover for the open hole. So you're tied off to your device as you're climbing up the ladder. You step out onto the platform, you close the gate, you disconnect your fall protection. Now that gate is preventing you from falling down through, but there was also additionally a door that would close down and cover up the ladder well, so that way you couldn't drop tools or, again, somehow climb over the railing or leave that open and fall through. So there's kind of double protection there in place. If the floor hole has to be open, maybe you use that to transport materials from one floor to another, or maybe you have some work to do. You have to have somebody standing there to alert people to a hazard, or it has to be protected by some sort of temporary railing system in place. So make sure that we take that into consideration on any of the floor openings. On slide 24, we'll talk a little bit about open-sided floors. So any open side of floor, 4 feet or more off the ground, has to be guarded on all sides, again, except where there's an entrance to a ramp, stairway, or fixed ladder. And stairways themselves, I already mentioned it, but every flight of stairs having 4 or more risers need to have standard stair railings or standard handrails. And those will be talked about here on slide 26 and 27. So a railing is defined, it needs to consist of a top rail, an intermediate rail, and the posts. Has to have a vertical height of 42 inches from the upper surface to the top rail. And the top rail has to be smooth. Obviously, you don't want, some wooden top railing there that's full of splinters and you're running your hand along it as you're walking, you get splinters or, some other type of non-smooth or hazardous surface. And then we also have to make sure the ends of the rails do not constitute a projection hazard beyond the posts. Slide 27 talks a little bit about the stair rails and handrails. And just from a compliance perspective, you want to make sure that stair railing is not more than 34 inches, nor less than 30 inches from the upper surface of the top rail to the surface of the tread, in line with the face of the riser at the forward edge of the tread. Just to make sure that it's in a standard place, people are accustomed to where these stair rails are and handrails are. This obviously takes into account the average heights of people and where we need to have that support. And lastly, on slide 28 there, actually there's a couple more slides on railings, but one of the most important things, I come upon this in construction projects, any railings that we construct have to be able to withstand a load of at least 200 pounds applied in any direction. So when we're out there in the work area and you see an open excavation and all it's around is that orange construction fence, if that's installed properly, it can withstand 200 pounds, but oftentimes you see it just kind of leaning halfway into the hole, not really secure at all. It has to be capable of holding somebody up if they inadvertently leaned on it, and that's the 200 pounds. So making sure that no matter what we construct, it's got to be able to withstand that load rating. When we have work surfaces at height and we have potential for people to be working below us, we may need to include a toe board along with the standard railing. And that toe board prevents you from kicking an object off the working surface down to the lower level below you and having it hit somebody below you. So those standard toe boards should be at least 4 inches in height. They need to be securely fastened. And you don't want to have more than a 1/4 inch between the bottom of the toe board and the top of the floor level, so that way nothing can sneak through underneath that. And then if there are any openings within the toe board, you don't want to have it more than 1 inch. And you can see from the depiction there on the bottom of slide 29 what that looks like. You don't want to have anything more than 1 inch in between the toe boards where they come together. So again, nothing can be kicked down in between the two. On slide 30, where material is piled to such a height that a standard toe board does not provide adequate protection, we need to add on some additional paneling to either the intermediate rail or the top rail. The toe board doesn't do any good if we have 3 feet of tile stacked up right in front of a railing. Obviously, the top tile on that stack could easily be knocked off onto the edge below. So if you have a situation like that where your material could still fall through between the intermediate rail and the toe board or the top rail and the intermediate rail, have additional protection there with the paneling. So just a little bit on some fixed stairs and portable ladders. Minimum width of fixed stairs should be at least 22 inches, again, to allow for safe passage by any person going up and down. And this really plays a pivotal role as well in emergency egress. If you have a stairwell that's too narrow, people are not going to be able to get out in an emergency situation if there's multiple people going down the same set of stairs. And on slide 32, you'll see a little bit about the stair treads. They need to be reasonably slip resistant, and the nosing shall also be of a non-split slip finish. And we already discussed the fact that the height and the tread width shall be uniform throughout the flight of the stairs, including the foundation structure or the platforms as well. And the platforms themselves, again, they can't be any more narrow than the width of the stairwell itself. And they need to be at least 30 inches in length, and that's so you don't inadvertently step right off that platform or step over it coming down the stairs. So I know I'm moving through some of this stuff fairly quickly. We only got a couple of minutes left, but a little bit on portable ladders. Anytime we're working at heights, we're putting ourselves at risk. So anytime we're going to use a ladder, we need to make sure that we have done our visual inspection before use, that all parts are free from sharp edges and splinters and they're in good working condition. And slide 35 will speak a little bit more to what we want to take a look at. But for step ladders, we don't want to have anything over a 20-foot max, and single ladders, nothing over 30 foot. And again, when we do our inspections of portable ladders here, making sure that they're maintained in good condition at all times. And if they're found to have an issue, we either repair it if it's possible, or take it out of service immediately and replace it. But we want to look at things like the locks, the side braces, any wheels or pulleys on the extension ladders, the rope that would be used for the extension, the safety feet, any other auxiliary equipment like the trays that come down to hold paint cans, that sort of thing. Really need to make sure that we do a very good visual inspection, and it's not a bad idea to add that into your preventative maintenance program, to even go above the initial visual monthly, but actually go through and have it part of an audit or inspection process at a frequent occurrence. And slide 36, preparedness for winter weather. So some of the things I wanted to bring up here, just because it's been such a hot issue this time of year across the country, making sure that we maintain parking lots and walkways in good conditions, making sure that you have a proper safety tire policy to communicate what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. Shouldn't be wearing high-heeled shoes through 6 inches of snow or ice where you can slip. And then lastly, having a communication tool out there, or tools, to constantly bring this to the forefront of the employees' minds. Again, you'll see one of the mannequins there in the top right. As employees are pulling into the plant one morning, this display was set up, just letting them know as they came into work that day there was a high risk of a slip or a trip, and before they even got out of their cars, they had their first safety communication of the day. You can also get little reflectors that change colors based on the temperature and notify you of hazardous conditions. And then that second photo there with the yellow and black checkered flag, what that is trying to show is there's a designated walkway. It's kind of hard to see, but there's a series of these flags from the back of the building all the way out to the parking lot, and this is an area where we have a concerted, focused effort on snow and ice removal. We ask our employees to stay there. We have a 166-acre site, 25 different buildings. It's really easy for people to fall back into their old habits and just go whichever way they think is quickest and easiest for them from building to building. And so we develop these walkways, we train to it extensively, and this is where our maintenance teams really focus all of their efforts. If you contract services out for snow and ice removal, making sure that you clearly communicate the expectations to that contractor is essential, and maybe even having some stuff on site for you to salt or shovel, whatever you need to be, in case they can't get to your site quickly enough, is really important. So slide 37, this is just kind of outlining the Enpro Industries and Enpro Learning Systems safety system that works. We've had tremendous success in our safety programs, and it comes from all of these things being implemented and just being relentlessly driven at all levels of the organization. And obviously having formalized safety procedures and inspections and things like that specifically would relate to what we're talking about today, but also that culture of near-miss and safety opportunity reporting. There are so many hazards in our workplace that can contribute to a slip or a trip or a fall. We need the employees engaged in bringing that to our attention, and they need to be involved as well in getting these issues corrected. So some of the things that you've seen on this slide today, that walkway, the mannequin displays, all of these tools were developed out of our employee-led safety teams. And it really comes from a culture of caring, sharing, and learning within our workplace. And I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes laying out that Enpro has been named one of America's safest companies twice now, and we've got this proven path to safety excellence. We actually offer opportunities for folks who are struggling to get that culture in place, who are struggling to really get that management commitment and that safety leadership aspect. We open up our facilities. We open up all levels of our workplace to outside folks who you can come through and not just hear from safety coaches or professionals such as myself. You do get to hear from our leadership team, our CEO and presidents, and their views on safety. But we're the only publicly traded company to allow complete access to the plant. So we bring you out to one of our facilities. We take you on tours of the plant floor to take a look at things that the committees have developed. And you actually get to spend time talking and learning from our employees right on the front line. And you'll see our next events coming up here April 7th and 8th in Daytona Beach, Florida. Not a bad place to be that time of year. Early registration runs through up this weekend, and there's some discounted rates, so you can always register after that. But really, I think what makes this event so special and so important is you're not just hearing it from the folks, again, like myself, but you get the opportunity to talk and communicate and work with our employees on the front line, because at the end of the day, that's really where the culture, that's where it all goes. If they're not involved, the culture is not going to be what it needs to be, and what better way to learn how to implement it than from those folks themselves. And then on our behavior-based safety training tool, Safety First, which I've mentioned a couple of times, we have an upcoming Train the Trainer event in Charlotte, North Carolina on June 16th and 17th of this year. Get access to the program as well as the materials. It's been a really effective program for us. So if you're interested in that, check it out. And you can also check out our site at mprolearning.com. And with that, I'll open it up to any questions.
Thank you, Jonathan. We will now move to the question and answer session. To ask a question relative to the content of the presentation, you can join the question and answer session queue by pressing *1 on your telephone keypad. I will announce you prior to bringing you into the conference to ask your question. Please remember that if you have your phone on mute, take it off mute when you are selected to ask your question. To ask a question via the web presentation, go to the chat pod, which is located in the lower left corner of your screen. Type your question in the available box and then click on the send button. Jonathan, while you were talking about footwear, someone had mentioned a type of footwear called yak tracks.
Yep, very familiar with those. I wasn't going to plug any particular item on its own, but definitely the yak tracks are one of the more common ones out there. And again, that's what I was trying to explain earlier. They slip on over the shoes and provide some better traction. Excellent if you do some outdoor walking. Excellent product to utilize.
Okay, we don't have anybody lined up for a question on the phone. Do you have anything else you want to mention, Jonathan?
No, I think, again, the most common issues that I have come across my desk are how can we help mitigate the weather issues, and I think that we spent enough time talking about that today. But there's also some questions that typically come up around just the platforms and the working surfaces in general. And I guess if I can leave you with one word of advice, the approach that we try to take is just eliminate the platforms and the step stools from our work environment. It's hard to eliminate all of those depending on what your business is, but if you have the noble goal, if you will, the end result is you don't want to have people in those hazardous environments or expose those hazardous conditions, and you approach it from a perspective of simply eliminating all of them, I think you will be able to come up with some really good solutions to make sure that you're not putting employees at risk on those. So that's usually one of the other questions I get.
Okay, we did have a couple questions come in while you were talking there. What's the difference between a single and step ladder?
A single and a step ladder?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure I understand the question. There are, when I think of a single, I guess I'm thinking about a little step stool. Maybe I'm interpreting the question incorrectly. But the difference between like a step ladder is usually when you see that A-frame versus something like an extension ladder or a straight ladder that does not have that A-frame. It's something that you would put in place and lean up against, a side of a building or something like that and then walk up it, whereas the step ladder has that A-frame with the cross braces and it kind of supports itself. If you think about changing a light bulb out in the center of a room, you'd use that step ladder because there's nothing to lean it against. But then I also think back to when I was a kid, going into the libraries, those little gray things that were on the floor so you could get to the books where it was just one single step on top, and when you stepped on it, your weight pushed down, and it actually created kind of a braking system so it wouldn't roll around on you. I'm not sure if that was the direction that the person was going with the question, but hopefully I answered.
Jonathan, they were referencing slide 34, where you have 2 bullet points you mentioned under portable ladder. Step ladders 20-foot max and single ladders 30-foot max.
Yeah, sorry, that should be like the single extension ladders where you don't have the A-frame. Sorry.
Okay, great. Next question. Do you have any suggestions for icy or slippery metal grading outdoor stairs or walkways?
Yeah, I think the best way to go about that is, again, through a maintenance program, being able to clear anything off, and then really going for that aggressive grit. There's a couple of different types of grading that you can go after, and you see it oftentimes on like the small metal stairwells or portable stair systems that are out there. You can really go and invest in just flat grading, which can get very slick and very hazardous. And then there's also a type of grading that kind of has, like teeth, if you will, that come up out of the surface itself and really give you that good, strong traction to be able to bite through the snow and the ice. But there's definitely one of the facilities I think about in New York. We have an outside solvent recovery system. We have to go up there and do inspections, and we used to have just simply that flat metal grading on there. And when we go up, we were being exposed to a slip hazard, so we had to change that out and really go to a system that had more of the teeth there, more of the bite to give that footwear. If you can't solve it through that, I would probably be looking at something like PPE, although that might not be the best option depending on what you've got going on. So if you can't solve it through eliminating the slippery surface and substituting in something stronger, and PPE isn't an option for you, I think the best bet would be to have a really aggressive maintenance program to make sure that you're out there clearing it off before anybody has to get up there and work on it, and just be really diligent about that at all times when the slippery conditions exist.
Okay, one last question. Do you know of any options relating to steel toes when the associate would use them occasionally without having to actually buy boots?
Without actually having to buy boots. There's several different types of, I'll call them temporary steel toes. There's the older style, which is simply a toe cap that usually has a rubber band, and it would kind of rubber band behind the heel of the shoe and hold it in place. I have found those to be a bit of a challenge. I think that smooth toe can create a slip hazard in itself. So what we've gone to, they kind of look like an old pair of galoshes, but they're a rubber sole, and they have a steel toe built into the top, and they come in a variety of sizes, and they slip over your footwear, assuming that you have standard footwear. Obviously, they won't fit over high heels, but they'll slip over some dress shoes and non-steel toe boots. And it has a rubber sole that still has good traction, and it provides the impact protection on the top of the boot. So that would probably be my best option. I don't have the style and brand that we utilize handy, but if I get any other questions after the webinar, I'll answer them in a Word document and distribute that out to the folks in the group, and I can add in the specific equipment we use. I just can't remember the name off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. We'll now end the conference. Following the conference, you will receive an email, and it will contain a link to a brief evaluation form. In an effort to make each webinar more beneficial to our customers, we would appreciate your input. BLR and NPRO would like to thank you for joining us today. This concludes our program.